We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I am Dr. Pete, and T is here with me. And this is the Friday afternoon All Things Gout. And we're going to cover literally all things gout here. And we're hoping that for those of you that join us, that you will ask questions. Feel free to type them into the chat. And I'm going to give a short presentation today, which happens to be one of the questions that one of our subscribers on our channel, Dr. Pete's Keto Club, asked recently. And it's a nice segue because what I wanted to talk about today anyway turns out to be the answer to that question. So this is cool. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. And then at the end of it, hopefully we'll have some questions. Tanner will have some for us. We can get a bit of a conversation going. We're going to hold to a program which is no longer than an hour. So let's go ahead and get started. So the question that I was asked last week is, why can eating bread cause a gout flare? Now, to give you some context in this, this question was being asked by somebody who had done a fast. And I don't actually have a lot of the details about the fast. I'm going to assume it was like an intermittent fast. And then they broke the fast by eating bread and then came up with a gout flare. Now, the answer to this, I believe, is pretty straightforward. And it ties in nicely with what I wanted to talk about today, because we are going to focus on what's called the polyol pathway. So, because the polyol pathway is something that is super, super important to not just gout and why we get gout flares, but also to diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, because I believe the polyol pathway is one of the major contributors to the chronic disease condition. So to review quickly, what does the gout flare cycle look like? All right, we have the standard American diet. And in the standard American diet, maybe some of you will remember to one of my past videos where I used as an example the standard American meal, which was a guy goes into a pizzeria, orders a couple of beers, a large pizza, cinnamon sticks, and a loaded salad. But you can apply that idea, that range of carbohydrate-rich foods to any meal during a standard American day. Perhaps their morning starts off with a very large bowl of oatmeal with all kinds of high glycemic fruit in there, and maybe they have juice with that, or maybe they have a coffee that has sugar added to it. Any of those situations are going to provide what I call simultaneous excess calories. And this is where you have a liver that's sitting there, and then all of a sudden you have the arrival. In the case of the pizza meal, you have the arrival of a large sample of alcohol. You have a large hyperglycemic event. This is going to be important to answering the bread question. That's a large load of glucose and then a large load of fructose. And all of these guys are arriving at the same time at the liver. So large load of glucose, fructose, and alcohol. You can substitute a soda for the alcohol or the orange juice that you had with your oatmeal. It doesn't make any difference. You're still going to have a very similar load in fructose and glucose arriving at the liver. Now, what happens under those conditions is we throw what is called the fat switch. This term was invented by Dr. Richard Johnson, who we interviewed previously, and we were going to be interviewing again early in March. The consequence of the fructose and the high glucose is that we produce a large load, we bring fructose into the liver, and then the hyperglycemic event, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, activates a program called the polyol pathway, and we produce a massive amount of endogenous fructose. Regardless of whether the fructose comes into the liver exogenously, so it comes in from the meal itself, or it's converted from glucose to fructose, the fructose then is going to be phosphorylated with ATP. So there are three things that happen. there is a significant, massive decline in the ATP that is in the liver. There is also a significant decline in the available phosphate. At the same time, we have a significant acute rise in uric acid, which causes the liver. If we're talking, we're also, I want you to also think about what's going on in the chondrocyte now. This is the cell that's in the joint. So maybe I should flip this right now and just go to the joint. So we have basically, with the fructose conversion to uric acid, we have this massive decline in ATP. We have a massive decline in phosphorus, and we have this massive elevation in uric acid. This is happening right in the chondrocyte within the joint. When this happens in the joint, there are two dominant things we're going to do there. We're going to activate de novo lipogenesis, and we're also going to activate the inflammatory cascade with the activation of JNK1 protein that's instrumental in the NLRP3 inflammasome, and also IL-1 beta. With the inflammatory cascade, then and we have these things that come together, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about this, we can have the gout flare. So the question is, what's going on in the bread question? Because this individual had a long fast, and then they broke the fast by eating a ton of bread. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to call this the deadly triad. And this is where we have the combination in general of alcohol with a hyperglycemic event, a large glucose load, and a fructose load. So to summarize again what's happening in the chondrocyte, we have the activation of intracellular inflammation. We have activation of JNK1, which is required for the inflammasome, right? That's the inflammatory event. And we have the inflammatory cytokine IL-1 beta. And this is how we get to the gout flare. Now, we don't necessarily have to have all three of these present all at the same time to generate or to activate the polyol pathway. We can do this just with a hyperglycemic event. So you need to remember that in the joint, that this is a hypoxic environment. The solutes that you find in the synovial fluid that bathe the chondrocytes will have similar concentrations of solutes to that of the circulatory system. So if we have a hyperglycemic event in the blood, we have a hyperglycemic event in the synovial fluid. Right now, let's talk specifically about why the bread is causing this issue. So you eat the bread, the dough is made out of glucose. If it's bread in general, because it's being made from a dough, is essentially a processed food. So honestly, the other factor here is there's probably high fructose corn syrup in that too. But let's just stay with the glucose. So we eat a bunch of the bread. The bread essentially is a large glucose load. It's a hyperglycemic event as far as the chondrocyte is concerned. All right, so let's look in detail now what happens with this. So we have hyperglycemia, which activates the polyol pathway. And the polyol pathway converts the glucose that's entering into the chondrocyte into endogenous fructose. And I know I've already said what happens twice. Let's do it a third time. The fructose is going to be converted through a series of steps into a sudden acute rise in uric acid, and the uric acid is going to flip the fat switch. So we are going to have the activation of the inflammatory cascade with IL-1 beta being produced, which will leave the chondrocyte and activate the innate immune system. So we have the inflammatory cascade, and we also have mitochondrial dysfunction. So here is a slide of the fructose polyol pathway, the conversion of glucose. A significant amount of that glucose that's come into the chondrocyte is going to be converted over into fructose. It's worth mentioning right now that it's not just hyperglycemia that activates this program. The hypoxic environment of the synovial fluid activates this program. If they've had alcohol to drink with the bread, alcohol also activates this program through aldose reductase. And then the sudden acute rise in uric acid also activates aldose reductase. So reductase, sorry. So slowing down, we have the polyol pathway, which is being expressed to produce the fructose. Now, in the original videos where I talked about the polyol pathway, this was part of the hypothesis. I did not yet have my hands on any papers that showed clear-cut data that this pathway is in fact activated in the polyol pathway, or in the chondrocyte, excuse me. So here are two papers. The one on the left is a correlation study or an associational study. Why am I showing you this? Because associational studies do not indicate causation, but it's important to recognize when we talk about the study on the right, which is definitive evidence that there is an associational relationship between osteoarthritic joints and gouty joints. And the correlation is strong enough to make a statement that more than likely the core inflammational pathways that are causing osteoarthritis and gout are similar. They have core overlap. I'm certain that there are nuances in regard to how the two pathways are differentiated. Now we turn to the paper on the right, and I've listed it here so you guys can look it up yourselves. This is a paper that looked at the intricacies of whether or not the polyol pathway was actually or is actually activated in the chondrocyte, and they did this in two ways. They used actual human cartilage for the experiments, and the way that they got the cartilage was they had a number of patients that came in for knee replacements. A significant number of those patients were diabetes-free, and a significant number suffered from type 2 diabetes. So they did the knee replacements, but they kept the respective human cartilage from the knees of the people that they did the replacements in. And then they used that cartilage directly in experiments where they were able to show that the polyol pathway is in fact activated under conditions of hyperglycemia. So this part of the hypothesis that I've spent so much time promoting and putting out there for you guys to look at, and hopefully researchers and doctors that are interested in this enough to look at this hypothesis and think about it, because it gives us ways to come up with solutions to gout. That's the whole point of this. So this part of the hypothesis looks like it's true. I mean, that's what it looks like. Granted, this is only one study, but it in fact looks like the chondrocyte in a human joint can in fact do the polyol pathway under the conditions of hyperglycemia. And this is an important piece of data. So this is just to summarize what I was talking about just a second ago. So here's how it works. Somebody eating the standard American diet who is susceptible to chronic disease. And when I say that, a lot of people push back and go, well, Dr. Pete, that's not me. I'm not in that category, right? I'm healthy. Well, here's the thing. For people that are my age, 60 years and older, 52% of us are coming up pre-diabetic and type 2 diabetic. About half are obese, and about 48 to 50% have cardiovascular disease. And these are all being caused by the same systemic core drivers that we're talking about here in regard to gout, right? So remember, gout is not one of these things you get like a headache, right? Or I have a sliver in my finger. Give me an aspirin because I want the pain to go away. This is not gout. The fact that monosodium urate crystals are involved in this process is true. That's a fact, but they are not sufficient to cause a gout flare on their own. We need this cascade of events that's being driven by this fat switch, if you will, that we learned about through Dr. Richard Johnson's work. So on the right side of this diagram, I'm just showing the cascade. And there's an important thing in here that I didn't say in the last slide, but basically we have this hyperglycemic event because this individual has eaten a bunch of bread, all right? And the dough is made out of glucose. That's going to be a hyperglycemic event as far as the cells that receive this glucose are concerned, all right? The hyperglycemia in the cartilaginous chondrocyte actually upregulates the primary glucose transport system for that cell called GLUT1. It actually upregulates it. So not only is the glucose arriving there, but it's more efficiently transferred into the chondrocyte, which we've learned in past videos is a specialist in glycolysis, right? So you get this massive pool of glucose sitting at the head of the glycolysis stream, which is completely occupied. We have this pool of glucose, and the polyol pathway is activated to shunt that glucose out of there. And we end up producing the endogenous fructose, then the uric acid. The uric acid initiates the inflammatory cascade. All right. Okay. So now let's look at this last slide and put everything together, and then we can have a bit of a conversation. So you guys have seen this slide before. On the left slide is the chondrocyte, and I'm showing the chondrocyte looking sickly because it is. We have somebody who's been eating the standard American diet chronically, like someone like me who is a gout sufferer, for decades. So our cell systems are chronically inflamed, which means that they have the chronic presence of IL-1 beta. Now, under conditions of hyperglycemia and the IL-1 beta, which is being secreted out into the paracellular space, we can bring in the innate immune system, and that's what the right side of the slide is about. And there are two examples here of cells that have been implicated in the gout flare, that of the neutrophils and the macrophages. So when we have the elevation in the chondrocyte from chronic inflammation to an acute inflammational event, it can actually cause the chondrocyte to die. And in that process, monosodium urate is going to be released into the space between the paracellular space, which you can visualize on this slide, being between my sickly looking cell and then that big fatty membrane I have over there on the right, which represent either the membrane of a neutrophil or of a macrophage. The MSU that gets dumped into the paracellular space is going to be internalized into the innate immune cell. It's going to be through receptors. It's going to go into the neutrophil or the macrophage, most likely both. And then we have IL-1 beta that is being secreted now in large amounts that interacts with both the macrophage and the neutrophil. And then we have vesicular ATP, which is released because of the acute inflammational event into the paracellular space, which activates an inflammation-specific receptor called P2X7. And the ATP is actually hydrolyzed there. What this does is it opens up an ion channel that's powered by the ATP, and the main thing is that we push calcium ion into the macrophage or the neutrophil. The combination of the monosodium urate crystals and the calcium ion and IL-1 beta causes the activation of the NLRP3 inflammasome. So now you have these three things all together that are activating the inflammational cascade. We have the neutrophil in high gear, we've got the macrophage in high gear, and we've got the chondrocyte, which is dying and spewing out this stuff. Bammo, gout flare. So that's the basic idea behind this. We now know that the polyol pathway, there's data for it to be operating in the chondrocyte. We didn't have that the last time I gave a presentation, but we do now. One of the key factors before I end the presentation and we go to questions that we still don't know about is the contribution in this process of nitric oxide. And quite frankly, that is a mess right now. And I'm not able to, there's data on both sides of the coin that increased nitric oxide is promoting this process, or decreasing it is it's hard to know what the situation is. So with that said, I'm going to end the presentation now, and hopefully we'll have some, we can get a bit of a discussion going here with T. Any of you guys out there listening, please take advantage. Ask me anything. I don't care. Get on, put it in the chat, and let us know. In the chat, we have, I put our website there, and also our gout support channel, where you can meet other people that also suffer from gout, and we can trade our stories, we can trade recipes, we can talk about our gout remission there. So that's there for you guys. You can click on it. Also, you'll find the same information in the show notes. And with that, what are you thinking, T?
I guess what was interesting that you said specifically was that of your age group, that there's about 52% that has or have been diagnosed pre-diabetic. Do you happen to know the percentage of individuals, I'm sorry, but not just, but I'm saying pre-diabetic, but the percentage of individuals who are in their young years who may have a symptom of gout? Is it possible to even have symptoms of gout in your 20s?
Yes, it is. We have subscribers on our channel who are in your age group that some in particular complain of what's called refractory gout. In other words, they have lots and lots of gout attacks. In terms of statistics, your age group is much harder to deal with, not because you guys are the problem, but because a lot of these metabolic parameters just are not taken by the doctor when someone your age goes into the doctor's office. They don't measure uric acid, for example. It's not likely they're going to do the kind of metabolic panel that we have on our website, right? That lists out all the different markers that you should really look at minimum in order to answer the question that you asked me: am I metabolically healthy or not, or is there a problem? So it's like people my age going to the doctor, and it's at that point where the minimal things that they look for start to light up, and then you go back in for more tests, and then you find out, well, I'm like in my case, I was pre-diabetic, and I was diagnosed with gout in 2016, but I'd never even heard of uric acid until I went in there with my right big toe completely red and swollen, and I thought I'd broken my toe. I mean, my point is that no doctor from the time I was cognizant enough in a doctor's office to know that they were, ascertaining my health, had never talked to me about uric acid. And it's one of those things that I think should be measured regularly, starting at the time of birth.
Okay. So that was actually going to be my next question, is like, what age do you think you should start testing for these markers, right? Because for somebody who's my age, and I think I talked to you about this before, specifically getting my C-peptide, which I still have to go do, but that was a big question that I had specifically with the women's health issues is, when is the time to start testing for these things, right? To determine when there's an inflammation. So for uric acid at birth, I think that would be a really,
well, starting with that, and then as a person ages, I don't think you have to go in, like I do these biomarkers every 3 or 4 months, because I'm trying to sort out, not only for myself but for our listeners, what does it take to reverse these diseases, and how do we do that, and what does it take to do it? And you can only know the answer if you're actually like reversing this stuff, if you've got biomarkers to look at. But coming back to one thing that you said there, I want to piggyback on that. You mentioned C-peptide. So this is what I'm talking about. At some point, and I've put a lot of time into thinking about this. Like maybe you do a complete blood work span on somebody who's 5 years old, and then maybe you do it again when they're 10, and then at 15, something like that. I don't know, or maybe you do it every decade until they're 40, and then you step it up to every 5 years. But besides the uric acid, the issue that you raised, the C-peptide and the insulin, fasting C-peptide and insulin, super critical. And the doctor, I have yet to meet a doctor that's going to ask for that. You probably are going to have an argument with them.
I don't even think it's even like I don't even know. I don't even think it's brought up because when you go into the doctor's office, at least for my side of things, something that they always ask is, okay, what's your family history? Has anything changed? And that's one thing I have to say is, well, my dad was diagnosed as pre-diabetic. You know what I mean? And to me, that would be like the first initial thing I would do if I was, a doctor would be, okay, here, we're going to test all of these things. But instead, it was kind of like, okay. And then I got my normal stuff done that I have to do every year. So I don't get my health insurance premium. So it was kind of like, I had no idea about these markers. When I went in, we haven't had to do it for a while just because of COVID. But the last time I went in, I did it a little bit ago, but the last time I went in, it was kind of those, I hadn't even heard of the C-peptide biomarker and how that could be affecting. So I know for me, one thing that I'm going to do obviously you being my dad, but also meeting a ton of people who highly recommend, uric acid testing kids and everything. When I do have kids, I will be testing to ensure, especially if I have a daughter, being able to test the C-peptide and the insulin, maybe 5 years old, 10, and then at 15, right, when your hormones are moving in puberty, you can kind of start seeing that fluctuation, which may be preventative measures for future things.
Well, yeah, and the other piece of this that you haven't touched on yet is the fact that probably you, with your kids, you're going to be more careful about not overdoing the sugar, high fructose corn syrup, agave syrups, the honey, and the processed food. So your family is going to be in an advantage. I can remember when I was a kid, and we were in the midst of the 1960s when all the TV dinner stuff started coming out. I remember my mom used to serve that stuff up regularly, right? You could just take food out of the freezer, heat it up in the oven, and throw it down on the table, and we were eating that stuff, and the processed food revolution hit hard. And I think that's part of the reason why our generation is so basically chronically sick, right, with this stuff. And then, when I try to talk to people who are our age, or even friends of yours that are your age about this stuff, I think there's a tendency to think, oh, it's all woo woo or whatever, but the amount of sugar that people are eating, and when I'm not sure that all the listeners that we have know this, but when I talk about sugar, I'm talking about this broad range of compounds which are not good for us. The high fructose corn syrup, the agave syrups, with my Lord, they can have 90% fructose in them, and honey's 55% fructose. So here's the thing, maybe some listeners are going, well, aren't we talking about gout? And I'm like, yeah, we are, because fructose is one of the main instigators to this uric acid switch. And when you throw that switch, you're activating the inflammatory cascade, and you're vulnerable. If you happen to be predispositioned to gout, like apparently I am, down the road, that's probably going to be happening to you. So like this all circles back to the low carb lifestyle, cutting out the sugar, using that as a broad definition, and eating real food.
So that was going to be my next question is, do you think it's possible to put gout into remission by utilizing the ketogenic lifestyle?
Yeah, I do. Because number one, we get rid of the sugar, defined as a broad category. We cut into the carbs in addition. So wait, let me slow down. So we cut out the sugar, we eat real food. So right then and there, we have blocked the main activators of the inflammatory cascade that leads to a gout flare. We've already eliminated that by stopping with the sugar, the alcohol, and so on. Now, if we cut into the carbs and we get them down low enough, then we can get into ketosis. And I know that word can elicit fear with some people. It just means that we've got the carbs low enough that we've lowered the insulin so that we're predominantly fat burning. And when we're predominantly fat burning, we're producing ketones. And one of those ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate, has been shown with good solid evidence in the literature to inhibit the NLRP3 inflammasome, which is required for a gout flare. So the ketogenic diet, it puts a double whammy on the gout flare. We decrease the pressure to have an inflammatory cascade, and we produce a molecule that inhibits the gout flare directly. So yeah, I think it is. But the application of this, I think, it's a challenge for a lot of us, right? Because none of this happens overnight. And it's a new way of eating. You have to learn this new way of eating. And you have to be willing to eliminate a lot of things that you're used to eating that you just cannot eat. And right now I'm talking more about the sugar load than I am about the ketogenic part of it. I think when somebody starts the ketogenic diet, there's a tendency to think, wow, this is really spare. There's hardly anything on my plate. But that has more to do with the fact that they haven't really learned how to cook in the ketogenic lifestyle. I mean, what's your opinion? I think last night you were here at dinner. Did we have a lot of food or not?
Yeah, we had a lot of food. I think too that and the food was phenomenal, by the way. But I think that there's a fear, right? And I'm gonna say, for sure, a fear as well as a cultural, um, emotional, and this is where I'm gonna kind of jump on to the emotional side of changing. Like, change is really scary, right? And for you and me, I'm sure for me, I was kind of at a loss of like, well, I mean, preventative measures. I have some stuff going on, whatever. Like, I wasn't seeing a change. I was pretty upset with things that were going on with me. And then for you, being your daughter, like you were just hit with this life-based thing. Like, if you don't make a change, you're gonna go down, and this is gonna be bad, right? Is kind of like what happened. So I think both of us going through metabolic health issues, making this transition was kind of more of like, let's just give it a shot, because we've been trying everything so far and it hasn't been working, right? And so for us, the fear wasn't really there. I don't think, in the sense of, well, what if I try this and I have this emotional connection to this? It was more of like, F it, let's just do it, right? So I really have to say that I think that there is an emotional connection and a cultural relationship to high carb, high sugar foods, right? And so I think that this lifestyle, once you kind of get used to it, there's so many incredible things that you can eat. But I'm never bored. I never eat the same thing ever in a month unless I'm really motivated on eating the same thing twice. I've never experienced that. I've learned how to cook with whole real foods, and I'm providing, me, my family with really, really good stuff on the table. So no, I think that there's a lot of fear, but you have to let go of the fear, I think, in order to move forward and be extraordinarily successful in this lifestyle, and know that you can reverse issues such as gout, or put into remission gout, prediabetes, women's health issues, hormonal issues. It's definitely 120% possible. And there's a whole community that's done it. So I think there's a lot of fear behind it, which is normal. There's a lot of fear in everything. But I guess one thing I wanted to also ask you was, what is the most understood thing about gout?
The most understood or
I'm
misunderstood?
sorry, misunderstood. Misunderstood.
The idea that gout is a result of a uric acid crystal. And when I say that, people listening to this are going to go, but well, isn't the crystal required for a gout flare? Yeah, it is. But I'm talking about the nuances here in an argument, right? If you get a sliver in your finger, the sliver is causing, the pain and the inflammation. The area around the splinter is going to all turn red and it's going to swell up and it's going to hurt, right? So that is the mentality about gout as far as the medical establishment is concerned. And that's a misunderstanding. It isn't this way. When you get underneath the literature and you really start to look at this, there actually turns out to be somewhat of a disagreement about whether or not liquid uric acid or sodium urate is actually involved in this. There's an argument. What is the crystal doing? What is the liquid doing? And there's actually literature that suggests that there are effector molecules that are required. In fact, there's a paper out. I'm not prepared to pull it out right now, but that shows that stearic acid, which is produced during de novo lipogenesis, right after you've thrown this uric acid switch, is required along with a monosodium urate crystal to actually activate the pathway to get to the gout flare. So let me just finish by saying that what's misunderstood is that gout is part of a process. It's part of an inflammatory process. It's not a severe headache. It's not a severe headache that you get and you take an aspirin until it goes away. The reason you had that severe headache is because you got something going on in the core that's a lot more serious.
And you're definitely talking to somebody who suffered migraines for a really, really long time. So I know that for a fact that a serious headache is definitely something more severe in your body, and your body is trying to tell you something, than it is, it's going to go away, right? Because mine didn't. It stayed, and it came hard when it came.
Yeah, and there's two things I would throw out, and you can comment about this. Number one, I think you understand that carbohydrates had something to do with that, with the
For
migraine.
sure.
Yeah, number one, and number two, I don't think there's anything you can take to make a migraine go away. I mean, I think you can mask the effect a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. No, there's not. I could not take anything that made my migraines go away. And it's funny that you bring up the carbohydrate thing, because I actually, when I experienced the worst part of my migraines in my life, that summer in 2017, I think, or 2018, no, 2017, is when I experienced a headache for 3 flipping months straight. It felt like I actually tried to eliminate, based off of a recommendation of somebody else, I tried to eliminate any type of meat, fats, like proteins. I was eating literally like not veggies, but quinoa, like rice. I was trying to be very, regime on completely eliminating any, like on a based off of recommendation, right? I'm suffering these headaches, and it only got worse. Like it got so much worse for me, like to the point that I was sitting there and like in front of a computer screen, my head just throbbing. So I have to say that carbohydrates, now knowing what I know now, for our viewers, I've been on the low ketogenic diet now for 2.5 years, almost 3, and I haven't had a migraine really since. I've had one, at least one, but it came when I had more actually of a high carb, around the time of my cycle, monthly cycle, as well as I had more of a higher carb cauliflower pizza crust, actually, is what I'd eaten the night before, which I didn't read the ingredients, which is mistake number one. There's a lot of sugar in there, and that actually caused if you want to say it's similar to a gout flare, and migraine, right? That lasts a really, really long time. So yes, I'd have to say it's definitely brought on by high carb as well as the other thing.
So I think that there's parallels. I'm not suggesting that migraines are the same as gout. When I say parallel, I mean I think that the migraine is an end condition
Mm-hmm.
of this more central uh, insulin resistant uric acid model of chronic disease. And I think we all have different ways that we respond to our lifestyle environment, right? What we're putting in our mouth is the biggest part of that.
Yeah, and I was actually going to say, I mean, similar to what I just talked about, right, with migraines, is I suffered from migraines for such a long time. And because they're in remission, it doesn't necessarily mean I won't get one again, right? So, if, like I just explained, I recently got one this last summer around my monthly cycle, as well as I had a more high carb meal the night before, which seemed to obviously spike a migraine, right? Is that would you would you say it's kind of a correlation with gout? Is it when you put it into remission, does that mean that you won't ever get a flare again? Or will you, depending on what you eat or around the environment, or
Yeah, that's why I picked the word remission rather than reversal, uh, because if a person goes back to having alcohol and having well, like this individual who asked the question has a big load of bread with that most likely had refined, carbs in it, you're probably going to have a gout flare again. And I'm not innocent. Like I've gone through this has been a lifestyle change for me, and I still like to have a drink occasionally, um, and I can feel the ache start up in my toe joint when I've had a drink the night before. Um, it's
well,
not in.
it's
It's not,
interesting.
go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just gonna say it's interesting that you say that because you seem to feel, if you do have a drink, like where it's actually going to be affecting you. And it's funny that you say that because even if I'm not cautious, like even with having, like, I love whiskey, but even having a glass of whiskey, I will like feel it in my head if I didn't have, like that seems to be where it spikes. My head feels more, I don't know, inflamed. I don't know if that sounds weird, but it kind of originates to where, a pain point might actually be. I think it kind of shows you, it triggers that part, right?
Yeah.
It could.
So anyway, the answer to your original question is if you go back to eating sugar and in the broad way again, high fructose corn syrup foods, processed food, and alcohol, and you're in remission, gout remission, you're probably going to have a gout flare. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I don't have any other questions. I think that this was a really interesting topic, and I think it's really important to talk about. I like how you're making a history with this, Dad.
All right. Well, I think we had a great session. And for anyone who's listening out there, remember now we're doing All Things Gout every Friday. Sometimes we'll have a pre-recorded video here. Oftentimes it will be live. If there's an aspect of gout you would like to have an answer to, put it in the chat here. Send us a question to catonicrevolution@gmail.com. Look in the show notes. I have there's a link there for Ask Dr. Pete Anything. Um, we also have links to our coaching programs to help you with lifestyle change, any of these lifestyle changes. And we also have fantastic online courses. We have a gout remission online course. We also have the standard online keto course. These are really amazing courses they have.
And you get to work with us.
Yeah, and you're working with us directly.
And then I also wanted to throw in too before we get off. Sorry if I cut you off, and sorry if you're going to already
Okay,
bring
go
this
for
up.
it.
But we are interviewing Bitten on February 15th, correct?
Bitten Johnson, yeah, the
Bitten
foremost
Johnson.
expert in the world on alcohol and sugar addiction. Big deal
Yes,
for gout sufferers.
big deal. So we're actually interviewing her on February 15th. We are going to be releasing that, and I believe we're releasing it on Thursday, correct? 3 p.m. on Thursday.
Yeah, we'll do everything in our power to release it then.
Okay, so we'll do everything in our power then. And then the other really big event that we have coming, which we're really excited about, is we actually get to bring on Mr. Doctor Dr. Richard Johnson again, which I'm super stoked about. So
Yeah.
we had the first interview with him, and he's actually coming back in March. So please stay tuned for that. I know we're both really excited to talk to him, especially after Dad's discussion at Low Carb USA about actually putting gout into remission using the gout hypothesis. So this is going to be a really, really good conversation. And then, yeah, we'll let you know if it's going to be live. We'll keep you updated, posted about what's going on with that exactly. But we want to make sure that for you guys, we have the absolute best video possible.
All right. Just remember, keep the carbs low. Down the road we go.